Okay, guys, welcome to Business Bros. We're really glad to have Dwight here with us today. Dwight's a systems engineer who has spent a lot of time working on high level projects with NASA and the FAA. What makes his perspective so cool for this club is he doesn't just do the technical rocket science stuff, he also handles the business side, like managing budgets and hitting major schedule targets. We're excited to hear about how he balances those two worlds. Dwight, thanks for being here with us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Ford.
Yes, sir. So, Dwight, most people imagine rocket scientists in lab coats staring at chalkboards, but you spend a lot of time talking about cost targets in your daily life. Is it more interstellar or more the office? How much of your day is actually science versus managing the business?
I think it depends what level you're at. More in the beginning of my career when I was literally doing engineering work, whether that was the specification, the design, or inspecting some of the builds, very much was far more about the product itself and less about the profit, the loss. You always have to worry about targets, whether you're an engineer or business person. I would say the more senior I got in my roles and as I started taking on different roles, product always comes first, but it's typically the younger, more subject matter experts that are the ones hands-on keys or hands-on on hardware. And I'm stuck with dealing with budget forecasts and contracting aspects and estimate complete versus estimate to complete. When you guys get into work and learn about earned value management, try and forget that as quickly as you can. And then, of course, government contracting terms versus industry contracting terms. You're constantly learning new language, new acronyms. But these days, it's a little bit more about the business side, less so about the engineering, but the engineering never leaves you.
Okay. Okay. So the $8 million save, you saved NASA $8 million, which to us is enough to buy, a bunch of sports cars. When you spotted that mistake, how did you work up the nerve to tell the big bosses that they were doing it the expensive way?
I think they were elated to hear that they were going down a path that was too expensive. And well, we can either call it savings or cost avoidance, aka money they didn't have to spend. They were more than happy to hear about why they were going to be saving $8 million. At the end of the day, the Artemis rocket, which literally is supposed to launch astronauts around the moon here in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, frankly, is an incredibly complex machine. And it's the first time they were building it. Yes, it looks a lot like Saturn V. Yes, it looks a lot like the space shuttle, but it has its own unique components. And the first build of anything needs to go through a very stringent process of development testing and qualification testing. Simply put, we look for ways in which we could use what we call similarity or other techniques where, hey, if it works for this part, it can also work for this part, which reduces labor costs, material costs, reduces schedule, and is able to be one small element of the overarching vehicle.
And so how did you find that specific
It was more about
cause?
realizing there was opportunity space as we went forward. And for example, I led the thermal protection system, which is all the orange stuff you'll see on the outside of the vehicle. It's literally like spray foam in your house. This is what's going to space literally in 2 weeks. But for many of the assumptions where every piece needs to be tested, every piece needs a unique process. And as we got forward and started looking at the design, we saw that not every piece needed to be done uniquely. Sets and families of pieces could be done such that if I, for as an example, there are eight really, really big valves on this vehicle for liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. Turns out you only really need to test one or two instead of all eight. So
Mhm.
as that adds up over the hundreds of parts that require foam, you all of a sudden see, listen, instead of doing all eight or 900 parts, you only have to do 200 parts. And therefore, that's less money you have to spend, less time, less labor, and less material cost.
Okay. Um, Next question. So you've worked, as mentioned, with the FAA and NASA. In business, the customer is supposed to always be right. But what's it like when your customer is literally in charge of the space exploration? How do you keep NASA happy when the stakes and the budgets are this high?
If you hit schedule, you're going to make them happy. If they don't have to go back and ask Congress for more money, you're going to make them happy. In reality, that rarely happens. The term "space is hard" is not hyperbole; it is true. The cool part about working with NASA and the FAA and many of my other government clients who are, I'll say, more engineering centric, is that the data and the engineering often wins sometimes over schedule risk and or cost risk. The last thing anybody wants to do is have something not work that costs human life on a grand international stage. So the cool part is it's often more of a handshake than it is getting pulled in front of the principal if something goes wrong. We bring in the NASA engineers and the FAA engineers to work with us hand in hand and provide what we're calling both oversight, but as well as insight. So instead of getting before a board and getting yelled at, you bring the engineers in early and you solve the problem.
Okay, so when you were a junior in high school, did you know that you wanted to be a systems engineer? Were you still figuring it out?
So it's funny you bring that up. I always knew I wanted to work in the aerospace industry as long as I can remember. I don't know if it was Apollo 13 that was the inspiration or just thinking that flight and space was cool. When I was a junior in high school, I wanted to be an aerospace engineer, and I went to the number one school in the country for that. No one's ever heard of it, but it's called Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and it's in Daytona Beach, Florida, and it has a better undergraduate program than MIT and Harvard, which is pretty cool to say. It's also on the airport in Daytona Beach, 2 blocks from the Daytona International Speedway, and then, of course, everything else that goes with what you guys hear about with Daytona. But I was in school and I graduated in '09 right after the economy tanked. So I was waiting tables with a degree in aerospace engineering. I switched and pivoted to what's known as systems engineering because that's what the market was bearing at the time. People were hiring systems engineers more so than aerospace engineers. There's a little bit of nuance in the role, but at the end of the day, it was a very, very easy pivot to go to grad school and get more of a systems engineering focus than an aerospace engineering focus. So I hid out in Huntsville, Alabama. I moved from Florida to Alabama. Huntsville, Alabama is also known as Rocket City, USA. And I got my master's degree in aerospace engineering with a concentration in systems engineering. And that's ended up working out incredibly well because systems engineering is frankly the right arm of program managers and the chief engineer. You need to know how the thing works all the way from inception through retirement. So it's been a cool way to be like, yes, I have an engineer in my name, but it's predominantly program management, tracking requirements, keeping subcontractors on schedule, managing cost, things to that nature.
Okay, so your motto is many things done well. Why do you think being a jack of all trades is more important in the professional world?
I think it depends what your aspirations are. If at the end of the day you want to be a generalist, you can do multiple things while still having some specialties. If you just want to be somebody who is a software developer or a computer scientist, there are more, those are less well, they used to be less transferable these days. Who knows what's going to happen with the advent of AI and accelerators such as that. Same reason if you are a plumber, as an example, you might not be able to all of a sudden go do computer science. For me, multa benefacta, which is my high school's motto, ironically enough, is Latin for many things done well, the only three Latin words I know. And to me, if you are able to sit at a level and be able to dive in and help where help is needed, but also sit back and manage a program, I'm also just voraciously curious. So I think that that's part of the reason as well.
Okay, I love that. If a student in our club wants to work for a place like NASA or the FAA or be a systems engineer, but like isn't necessarily having math as their strongest subject, what business roles are available in those like high tech industries?
Yeah. So it's a great question. To be a true blue engineer, you need an engineering degree, and that involves a lot of math and
Hmm.
a lot of science. And candidly, that science is really just math with science terms. But every one of those programs, whether it's a Lockheed Martin, a Boeing, an Accenture, any company out there needs people who manage schedule, budget, human resources, human capital, anything that you think of that makes a business tick is involved in those companies. And sometimes it's luck of the draw or where you're physically located as to whether you're going to be on a cool program. As an example, Lockheed Martin builds the F-35 in Fort Worth. So if you are a business specialist or a long-term business development individual and you just happen to get a job with Lockheed, it's very plausible that your desk is next to the F-35 fighter jet. It just so happens that you don't necessarily need as much math as the people doing the design.
Yeah. Okay. And then what's like one small move that a student could make now, like this week, to start building that reputation for many things well?
Ooh. So I would say that your club is Business Bros. To me, business is such a great place to have a toolbox of knowledge. As an example, where I went to college, though it was aviation focused, we still had business degrees. It just so happened to be that if you went into a business field, it wasn't something aviation related. So while you might get a business degree from a school that is all aviation, some of it's in airport management, some of it's in airport financing. So there are different verticals within the larger business tent that you can start to familiarize yourself with today. As an example, in Dallas, everything's about finance, venture capital, private equity, managing the market. So there are various verticals within the larger business vein that you can start familiarizing yourself with now that you don't necessarily need to be a specialist in, but you can carry a conversation and be more than an inch deep knowledgeable if you're all of a sudden at an event where it requires insight into futures rather than just managing profit and loss of.
Okay. So if you could give your younger self advice on what he should start getting into, what would that be?
For me, because everything I did was so engineering centric, I am realizing that now that I'm not really in the engineering vein anymore, and I work for Deloitte, which is a consulting firm, having more insight into macroeconomics, more insight into general business would have been something I would have liked to do early on. Conversely, for say the folks in your group who are very business centric, if they have a specific discipline they care about, we'll take oil and gas as an example since we're here in Texas, it might behoove them to also understand something about geology or something about the refining process. So if I do have this business, I'll call it major, I do have some minor or surface level insight on how the oil and gas industry works. So you can talk macroeconomics or be a plug and play individual if that's the field you want to go into, where you can talk business, but you can also talk how the process works more so than the ones and zeros and profit and loss.
So Dwight, you made the pivot from like engineering to consulting. What was the driving reason behind that?
I think it was twofold. After a while, I left Huntsville, Alabama, and moved to Washington, D.C. Building stuff for space is the coolest job I've ever had. I'm not a Huntsville guy. I grew up in the Philadelphia area, so I wanted to be a little bit closer to home. And I got to a point where I realized that as a true blue engineer, you do pigeonhole yourself a bit. And there was more to be done on the business side of things or on the contracting side of things. Honestly, I had an ex-girlfriend who thought I'd be a really good consultant. They had an engineering practice, so I applied and got the job. What I didn't understand was engineering and consulting is far more about helping people understand best practices and what to go do versus actually rolling up your sleeves and turning a wrench. But it turns out that that's worked so well because I have gotten an incredible piece of insight into how to be an entrepreneur, and I'll touch on that in a minute, understanding contracts, being able to price out proposals, doing business development. So not only can I do the proposal and price it out, I can do the what we call delivery or engineering. And I can also talk about here's how we're going to do additional work. So as an example, one of the coolest things is the ability to do engineering work in a consulting environment. One of the first projects that I had was helping NASA and the FAA, ironically enough, as a Deloitte consultant, understand what the future of flying taxis in urban environments are going to look like. So people carrying flying taxis, very much like the Jetsons. But I've had other clients that are far more mission based, whether that's in Department of Defense, I guess Department of War now, or Homeland Security. My latest client, and I have to fly to Detroit next week, is an Army ground vehicle project, and we're trying to help them rethink how they go about buying equipment or building new equipment, and how to get the best capabilities into the warfighter's hand.
So you talked about having that entrepreneurial mindset that you gain once you switched into consulting. So are you going to stay in this business at Deloitte for the foreseeable future, or do you plan on using those entrepreneurial skills that you gained in the future?
I'll give you the political answer and then I'll give you the honest answer. What's cool about Deloitte is that you have to be basically your own CEO. And I know that sounds very cliche, but you have to go sell the business. You then have to deliver the business, and then you have to continue to sell and ensure that you're delivering a great product. So it could be that, listen, all of a sudden, we're not buying Slinkies anymore. We're now buying robots. So you need to be an entrepreneur enough to understand, well, we at Deloitte do X, Y, and Z. And while it worked for Slinky, is I need to figure out how it works for robots. And then I need to go sell the business. I need to close the business, write the contract, staff the project, and see it through to the end. So the political answer is Deloitte and other consultancies, whether it's Big Four or some of the, or whether it's Bain or BCG or others, they all have that similar slant. So folks in here oftentimes will use consulting as a proving ground to then start their own business or go work as a COO or a CEO. For me personally, Deloitte's working great for me. I've been there almost 8 years. I just got back from 4 months paternity leave, which is an amazing benefit that you guys will want at some juncture. But I think a lot of it is going to be what are the market drivers, aka what are people buying? How is AI going to disrupt our industry? There's still a big question mark on that. And moreover, what are my personal passions? I'm at a very cool inflection point where I've had almost three different careers. So I feel very well armed to jump into anything that might be more Texas and Dallas centric. Many of my clients are in DC. And or, hey, all of a sudden we see this gap in the market and there's some startups that need help or an idea that I have. It's very easy to pivot. Easy, I say that in air quotes. It's very plausible to pivot into something like that. The final thing I guess I'll say is too is you guys are probably realizing, and if you don't, you will, the opportunity that exists in the Dallas Metroplex is insane. Whether it's your dad's friends or your classmates' friends who have offices at Old Parkland, which is one of the largest concentrations of private capital in the country, or the Texas Stock Exchange, or any of the other businesses that are adjacent to those high net worth individuals with a lot of dispensable capital. Lots of opportunity for any good idea to get investment and support and either be the next Google or just be a just generally good business moving forward. So that was a long answer to your question, but I think the best, most honest answer is we'll see,
We'll
and
see.
the market will drive what it looks like.
So speaking of we'll see, I would love for you to expand on how you think that AI will change your industry and will affect your industry.
So I think the answer is stair stepped, as with anything. AI is only as good as how it is being used and how it is being adopted. All of my clients are federal government, so they have great use case ideas. Sometimes it just takes longer to put in place. I'll comment more on the Deloitte side. So, as an example, we have many AI tools that are helping us do research faster, build slides faster, get greater pieces of insight, prepare reports, the whole nine. That is all well and good up to a point. You always need what we call a human in the loop to then validate that all that information is correct. It is contextual. As an example, I used AI literally yesterday to help me consolidate over 30 hours of interviews that I did with some of these Army clients into what the main takeaways were. And I got the report at the end and I was like, whoa, 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 this isn't half of what I heard. So I needed to use my human in the loop expertise to tailor that report to our clients. I would say
Mhm,
you're seeing the same thing with some of our federal clients. As an example, for my TSA client, we tried to build them an AI agent to help the transportation security officers, people checking your ID and walking you through the security checkpoint, arm them with like a frequently asked questions AI thing where if somebody came forward with a unique circumstance they hadn't seen before, they type it into this AI and have the question immediately instead of having to call their supervisor. In other instances, AI is doing things like computer vision for biometrics checking at the checkpoint or in other places. We've been talking to the Army about how they might be able to use AI to do driverless tanks, very much like Waymo. Obviously, that's a little bit further off than Waymo, but there's a lot of, I think, high potential use cases. And it's a matter of how it's implemented, how it's adopted, and the trust in the AI maybe is the most important things. Again, another sort of consultant and political way of saying we will see. But I think at the moment we're probably just at the cusp of adoption. We're trying to figure out if the value is there or not.
okay. What do you think are some fields that you would either recommend going into or advise against going into with AI?
Yeah,
Um,
it's a really
so
good question. For people who are really big on computer science, or maybe better said, software engineering, you're going to find more and more AIs that are going to be able to do more and more of the coding. That doesn't mean that discipline's going to go away. I think you're just going to find less jobs in that field. Every white collar job, just about every white collar job that has something that is repeatable, will find that it has AI disruption. But there's a few things that AI cannot fix. One, interpersonal skills. AI does not have interpersonal skills. I heard one thing on the internet the other day where people buy from people they like more so than, here's just a dry sales sheet on what you should buy. So the Business Bros Club is a great way to garner your social skills. The second is I think that there's certain inference that AI can get from the internet and from crowdsourcing that still needs somebody who is smarter in that field to go in and help, I'll say, add to or validate or provide more context. So for me, it's a bit of a cheap answer, but every industry is going to be disrupted. You can't go wrong with a general business degree. You can't go
Mhm.
wrong with a general engineering degree. There are just various, I think, slivers of the market. They're going to find greater disruption from AI than others, but it's going to perturbate everything that we do, candidly. But you know how to use it. If you're the person who knows how to use the AI versus the person who's getting replaced by the AI, it's always better to be in control of the thing that is replacing rather than be
It's true.
controlled by the thing that's replacing.
Yes, sir. Yes. Okay, so Dwight, what do you think is if you had to give one piece of advice to everybody here, what would that be?
Gosh, I'll give more professional advice than I'm going to give life advice. That one's on you guys. You have parents. I'm not going to try and replace them. The biggest thing that I would say that I think I have realized now that I've gotten out of engineering and I've gotten into, I'll say, the business side of things, your network is everything. And with that, your word is everything. What do I mean by that? When I lived in Alabama, there was very much, hey, nice to meet you. Give me a call. Let me help you out. And they didn't really mean that. It was just a way to be nice. When I lived in the greater Philly area, if we made fun of you, we liked you and you needed to sort of pick up on that. If we didn't make fun of you, we didn't like you. I moved to Texas and I met people who were incredibly genuine. We met, we shook hands. They said, please follow up. I'd love to help out. And then they would get pissed if you didn't follow up, which was actually a bit of a hilarious turn of things. So I say that to give you advice associated with your network is an incredible tool in the North Texas region, both the network you have right now and the one you will invariably make in college. I rarely talk to high school friends anymore, predominantly college friends, and make your word matter. So, as an example, if you say you're going to do something, go do it. Or if you can't do it, follow up and say, hey, listen, I know I said I was going to do this. Here are the good reasons why I can't do it or I'm going to be delayed. In that, those soft skills that AI can't replace, such as your interpersonal skills, your network, and your ability to follow your word, lean into those. The rest is somewhat nebulous or it's an enabler based on your industry, but those are the things that you can control that the market will not dictate, nor will AI dictate.